You can't park that truck there, Lena. HOA policy, driveways only. You read the bylaws, right? Barbara Clemens didn't bother lowering her sunglasses or smile, not even a neighborly twitch as she pointed at my brother's old Silverado, half on the curb. I bit down on my answer, hands in my jacket pockets. Barbara, that curb's on my deed. My father's name is literally stamped into the concrete. Before you threaten me, you should know he built this street. She bristled, but I caught it, that flicker of doubt. The bylaws are clear, Miss Avery. Fines accrue daily. I cut her off. And your bylaws don't override the city. Want to test it? My brother's the one who writes half your citations downtown. You want to call this in? Be my guest. I kept my voice level, just loud enough for the neighbors across the street to pause mid-lawn mower. Barbara's lips pinched, but she jotted something on her clipboard, her gold HOA pin glinting in the late sun. Let me back up for a second. I'm Lena Avery, 38, high school science teacher, single mom, stubborn as hell. This house isn't just a property line on a surveyor's map, it's my dad's legacy, right down to the hand-built fire pit under the old willow and back. I grew up with his voice echoing off these porch rails, teaching me how to patch roof shingles and how to tell a bully to find a new target. He died last fall. The last thing he asked me, after the chemo, when he was already fading, was to keep this place a real home, not just a house with a mortgage. He left me a handwritten map folded in his toolbox, marking every fix, every quirk, every story behind these walls. I haven't shown it to anyone, not yet. That's why when Barbara rattles her clipboard and threatens me with community standards, I don't flinch. I can't. There's too much of him in these floorboards to let a retired paralegal with a God complex decide what counts as acceptable. If you've ever watched someone you love lose every fight except the one for their own dignity, you know exactly where I'm coming from. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your city or neighborhood in the comments. And if you want to see how far an HOA will go when they mess with the wrong family, make sure you're subscribed. You're going to want to see this ride. Back to the scene. My brother Eli's truck parked just slightly crooked, tires hugging the curb the way he always did on night shifts, never quite letting his guard down. That old Silverado isn't just a truck, it's how he hauled our dad's oxygen tank to the lake for one last sunset. It's still got a dent in the bumper from where I tried learning to drive stick and nearly took out the mailbox. Eli and I, siblings who bicker, sure, but there's nobody else I'd trust to have my back when things get dicey. I watched Barbara clip her pen to her clipboard and stride down the sidewalk, muttering under her breath about civility and setting examples. The neighbors started glancing up from their garden beds, their eyes quick to flick away if I caught their gaze. This isn't the neighborhood I remember. I left here at 19, chased scholarships and heartbreak, and came home to find everything the same. Except now, there are security cameras on every other mailbox, and people post anonymous complaints in a group chat instead of knocking on your door. Inside, the house still smells like cedar and lemon oil, the way Dad liked it. There's a coffee mug on the counter. His mug. World's okayest dad, the letters faded from too many dishwasher cycles. Danny, my daughter, sprawled on the sofa with her earbuds in, pretending not to hear the lawnmower drama outside. Did she give you the look again? She asked, one eye cracking open. Worse, she gave me the clipboard. I tried to make it a joke, but my stomach was already twisting. I set my keys in the chipped ceramic bowl my dad made in night school, felt the weight of the folded map in my pocket. Some things you inherit, some things you fight for. When Eli texted, "Want me to drop by in uniform tonight?" I almost laughed. But truth was, I could see where this was going. With Barbara, it was never just about the rules. It was about who owned the story of this block, who got to decide what home meant. And for me, it was about making sure my father's stories, the ones written in charcoal and sweat and stubbornness, didn't end with a form letter from a petty dictator. This is where my fight starts. I woke up to the sound of a weed whacker. Barbara's hired landscaper, trimming a perfect rectangle along the sidewalk as if grass grew better when it feared authority. Through the blinds, I spotted a fluorescent orange notice fluttering on my front door. Not a friendly note, another citation, this time recycling bin, visible before 8 a.m. Who writes these rules anyway? Danny sat at the kitchen table, picking at dry toast. She was barely awake, her hair still wild from sleep. "Is this place always like this?" she mumbled, glancing up at the window. "Back in Portland, we never even met the neighbors." I forced a smile. Around here you'll know everyone whether you want to or not, especially if you break one of Barbara's 10 commandments. The phone buzzed, a group chat notification from Willow Estates residents. I tapped it open. Please refrain from using colored flower pots. HOA guidelines require neutral tones. Below that, a passive-aggressive gif of a frowning emoji. Guess someone spotted the cobalt blue planter I set out yesterday. This wasn't the street I remembered. Growing up, neighbors watched your dog, lent you sugar, and sometimes left homegrown tomatoes in a brown bag on your porch. Now it was surveillance by screenshot. Nothing went unnoticed, especially not me. Barbara orchestrated her own little theater of compliance. She'd planted herself in a camp chair by the HOA bulletin board, clipboard in hand, calling out morning walkers. Don't forget to edge your lawn, trash pickup's delayed. She wasn't subtle about her power. She was rehearsing for a part nobody wanted her to play. Later, at the monthly HOA meeting in the echoing clubhouse, I took a seat in the back, hoping to blend in, failing immediately. Barbara cleared her throat into the microphone. Let's address our ongoing concerns about property standards. Ms. Avery, since you're new, would you like to stand and explain why your garden is so wild? Eyes locked on me, some with curiosity, most with judgment. It's native plants, less water, good for pollinators. My dad, he always said, let the bees have a corner. My voice barely wavered. I kept my hands clasped on my knees so nobody would see them shake. Barbara's lips curled. We appreciate ecological awareness, but we also have standards. Karen Dorsey, board member and rumor enthusiast, nodded like a plastic bobblehead. In the far corner, Tom Grady typed the minutes with stiff, slow fingers, eyes never leaving his keyboard. The rest of the agenda zipped by. Noise complaints, mailbox heights, what color curtains were acceptable. At one point, Barbara held up a laminated bylaw, waving it like scripture. If we let one rule slide, where does it end? We have order here. That's what keeps property values up. She smiled like she'd won. After the meeting, Karen cornered me by the coffee urn. Just a tip, Barbara's got the board in her pocket, except maybe Tom. He keeps to himself these days, but he's not a bad guy. She gave me a once-over, eyes lingering on the tattoo at my wrist. They'll keep pushing, until you push back. I pocketed a stale cookie and left, my head buzzing. Outside, dusk painted the sidewalk in long gold stripes. A neighbor across the street, Paul Tran, gave me a hesitant wave, but ducked into his garage before I could cross. That's the thing about living under someone's thumb. You start second-guessing what's yours. Is this my house or is it theirs? I lingered by the old willow in the backyard, tracing the rough bark, thinking of Dad's voice and the time he built me a tire swing. That tree, battered by storms but still standing, was the last real piece of him. I leaned into it, just for a second, and let the night air steady me. Back inside, Danny sat at the dining table scrolling her phone, earbuds dangling. Everyone's got something to say about us, huh? She asked, not looking up. People always talk, I said, sliding into the seat across from her, but that doesn't make them right. I pushed her a plate of microwaved lasagna, comfort food for hard days. I knew the fight had started, whether I wanted it or not, but I wasn't just fighting for my peace and quiet. I was fighting for my father's memory, for the house he built with his own hands, and for a place where my daughter could finally belong. Every warning, every cold stare, every friendly reminder, it just made me dig in harder. I spent the next morning elbow-deep in compost, pulling weeds and taming the riot of wildflowers along the back fence. The sun cut through the willow branches, dappling the grass in my forearms with gold. Somewhere beyond the trees, a neighbor's wind chimes tangled in the breeze, out of tune but stubbornly holding on. I envied that. Danny poked her head outside. The mail's here, another letter with the HOA logo. She tossed it onto the porch with 2 fingers, as if it might bite. I dusted off my hands, wiped sweat from my brow, and opened it. This one was new. Unauthorized backyard fire pit, violation, immediate removal required, $150, 0 cents fine. My chest went tight. That pit had been here since I was 8. Dad built it himself, with Tom Grady and a borrowed wheelbarrow. It wasn't just a circle of stones. It was late-night stories, burnt marshmallows, Everything good about home. Great, I muttered. They're coming after the ghosts now. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked off seconds while I debated my next move. Fight or cave? The clipboard crowd wanted me worn down. Death by paperwork. I remembered what Karen said after the last meeting about Tom being different. Tom Grady, HOA secretary, lived 3 doors down. He'd been at every meeting, always scribbling notes but never speaking up. Dad trusted him once. Maybe I could too. That afternoon, I found Tom watering his marigolds. He wore the same faded ball cap I remembered from childhood, but his hands shook as he turned the hose off. He saw me, nodded, almost shy. "Morning, Tom. Got a minute?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. He hesitated, glancing at the curtain twitching in Barbara's window across the way. "Make it quick, Lena." I held out the citation. "You remember this fire pit? Dad's pride and joy. You, too, built it together." He swallowed. "Yeah, I remember. Your father, he always said a house wasn't a home till you could sit by a fire and forget the world for a bit. Barbara's saying it's illegal, wants it torn out. I tried to keep the edge out of my words, but it slipped through anyway." Tom didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he knelt to deadhead a marigold, fingers trembling. "Rules are rules. Board voted last month." I bent down beside him, lowering my voice. "Was it unanimous, or was this Barbara's idea?" He didn't answer right away. I noticed the way his shoulders hunched, how his eyes flicked to the clipboard inside his open garage. Sometimes you can't say what you want. Not without paying for it." A car rolled by. Karen Dorsey, window down, pretending to check her mailbox, but listening with both ears. "Look, Tom, you knew my dad. You know he wasn't a troublemaker. You signed off on those plans, didn't you? I found your initials on the old survey in his files." Tom's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. People forget what's fair, Lena. All that matters to some folks is who's in charge." He gathered his tools, his hands shaking hard enough I thought he'd drop them. Before I could press further, Barbara herself strode up the sidewalk, smile tight and empty. "Everything all right here?" Her gaze pinned Tom first, then me. "Just talking about the fire pit," I said, matching her smile with one of my own. "Didn't realize nostalgia was a crime." Tom retreated, nearly tripping over the hose. I gotta go. Things to do." He vanished into his garage, door rattling shut. Barbara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Sentiment's nice, Ms. Avery, but rules keep us civilized. We can't make exceptions for every sob story." I wanted to argue, to shout, but instead I let her words hang in the air, heavy as summer thunder. "You want to fight over a fire pit? Fine. But don't think for a second I'm rolling over." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. "We'll see about that." Back inside, Danny watched me dump the mail on the table. "They're not going to stop, are they?" I shook my head. "Not until we give up, and we're not the giving up kind." She smiled, a little. "Dad would have roasted them alive at the next meeting." I almost laughed. He probably would have. Tom's silence weighed on me more than Barbara's threats. There was something he wanted to say. Maybe next time he'd find a way. Have you ever felt pressured to give up something that mattered just because someone else said you should? Tell me where you're watching from and what home means to you. This fight's only getting started. Don't miss what happens next. By Friday, the backyard felt like forbidden territory. Each time I glanced at the fire pit, I half expected to see crime scene tape. I still hadn't touched it, not out of guilt, but stubborn principle. Dad's stone circle wasn't going anywhere. Danny found me after dinner, her eyes flicking between the windows and her phone. "Are you really going to let them tell you what you can do in your own yard?" "No," I said, too quickly. "I just haven't figured out how to win yet." She grinned, all teenager bravado. "I'll invite Paul and his daughter over for s'mores. If Barbara wants a fight, let her knock on the door when the whole neighborhood's here." It wasn't a bad idea. I shot Paul a text. He replied with a thumbs up and a marshmallow emoji. By 8, the backyard was alive. Paul brought his daughter Nora, who shyly hugged a pillow, and Karen Dorsey made an appearance carrying a tray of cookies, likely more interested in the gossip than the fire. I noticed Tom Greggy hovering at his back fence, fiddling with the latch but never quite joining us. The air buzzed with nervous energy and burnt sugar. Danny lit the first flame, her lighter stubborn and flickering. For a moment, the fire pit glowed the way it had when Dad hosted backyard cookouts, everyone swapping stories while fireflies blinked overhead. I watched the orange light dance across familiar faces. Even Karen seemed to relax, biting into a cookie with a theatrical sigh. That's when Barbara appeared, not just walking, marching, clipboard in hand, phone held aloft like a weapon. She didn't even greet us. This is a direct violation. I warned you, Miss Avery. Open flames after dusk? I'm calling the authorities. Karen blanched, half a cookie still in her mouth. Paul stood up, voice tight. The city code says fire pits are legal if they're contained and attended. I checked last year. Barbara glared. This isn't about city code, it's about safety and precedent. I didn't back down. My father built this pit with approval from the city and the HOA. Want to see the permit? Barbara bristled, her finger flying across her phone. You're going to regret this. As she stormed off, Tom finally stepped from the shadows, arms folded. He didn't say anything, just met my gaze for the briefest second before disappearing again. Maybe that was his way of showing support. Or maybe it meant he was still stuck, caught between doing what was right and keeping his head down. By the time the fire died out, the mood had soured. Even Danny, who usually shrugged off drama, was pacing. Can they really call the cops over a fire pit? They may call whoever they want, I said, rubbing my temples. Doesn't mean they're right, but she'll try to make trouble. True to form, the next morning a letter with the HOA's logo arrived. Due to repeated violations, the board will pursue legal remedies, including city intervention and property liens. Remove the fire pit immediately. Danny saw it before I did. That's ridiculous. They can't just take our house. They can't, I agreed, more for her sake than my own. Still, the threat sat heavy on my chest. Paul stopped by later, hands stuffed in his jacket. If you need a witness for the city, I'll stand by you. Folks around here have let Barbara push him around too long. Thanks, Paul. I think I'll need every friend I can get. Karen texted next. Heard the board splitting over this. Tom's not voting your way, but he's not voting with Barbara either. Maybe you should talk to him again. I stared at the message, heart pounding. It was something. Maybe the start of a crack in their perfect wall. That night, I sat on the porch swing beneath the willow, tracing the edge of Dad's folded map. I thought about legacy and stubbornness, about neighbors who were just as tired as I was of living under a microscope. Maybe Barbara was right about one thing. Precedent mattered. And if she wanted a precedent, I'd give her one she'd never forget. I hardly slept. My mind was running laps, questions echoing. Did Barbara really have the authority? Was there something in Dad's files that could help? Around 3 a.m, I finally gave in, grabbed a flashlight, and headed to the basement, the place where Dad hid everything important, or at least everything worth keeping from prying eyes. The steps creaked under my weight. Each footfall stirred up a musty blend of old lumber, mothballs, and the faded tang of tobacco. The bare bulb flickered when I tugged its chain, painting the concrete floor in trembling light and shadow. I'd been down here as a kid, daring myself to peek behind old boxes just in case something crawled out. Now, my fears were different. Paperwork, not monsters. I started with the metal file cabinet in the corner, the one Dad had chained shut after someone broke into his truck in '09. The key was still on his key ring, tucked in my desk drawer upstairs. I twisted it open, heart thudding, and pulled out folders, warranties, tax returns, endless stacks of utility bills, nothing helpful. In the far corner, behind a stack of half-collapsed moving boxes, I found a battered wooden crate marked Monady City Docs. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside, I uncovered a weathered manila envelope, the corner curled and brittle. I slipped it out and sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest. Flickering shadows made the typed pages dance as I flipped through. There it was. A city permit for open-air fire installation. Approved. A signature. Tom Grady, 1997. Another inspection sheet from a city official, stamped compliant. At the bottom, a note in Dad's looping hand. For Lena. If they come for it, you show 'em this. I pressed my palm flat against that page, breathing in the old ink, the memory of his voice telling me to keep fighting for what matters. Underneath the envelope, I found a single Polaroid. Dad, Tom, and a much younger Barbara, standing in front of the fire pit, all grinning. That picture felt like a message. Or maybe a warning. How quickly alliances change. A sudden thump overhead made me jump, probably Danny wandering for a midnight snack, but I still turned off the flashlight and waited in silence, heart hammering. When nothing else moved, I tucked the envelope into my sweatshirt and climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Difty was waiting for me in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket. "You look like you saw a ghost," she whispered. "Almost did," I said, showing her the envelope. "Dad left us the proof we need. It's all here. Permits, sign-offs. Barbara can't touch this fire pit." She yawned, grinning. "You're a legend, Mom." I smiled at her, the anxiety lifting for the first time in days. "I'm just stubborn. You get that from me." She rolled her eyes, but I caught the pride in her voice. "Are we going to show Barbara tomorrow?" "We're going to show everyone." My voice was steadier now. "This ends in the daylight, not behind closed doors." Before bed, I spread the map Dad left on the dining table. His handwriting pointed to every secret fix, every hidden story, reminders that this fight wasn't just for today. I left the Polaroid at the center, a little beacon surrounded by pen trails and old coffee stains. As dawn crept in, I made a list of what I'd need. Copies of the documents, backup on my phone, a message for Paul and Karen in case things got messy. I didn't trust the board to play fair. But I trusted Dad's foresight, and I trusted my own resolve. I stood by the fire pit, the last of the night's chill clinging to the stones. Sunlight cut through the willow, gold and stubborn. I traced the edge of a stone, thinking of my father, thinking of Tom's shaking hands. For the first time, I felt ready, not just to defend, but to go on the offensive. This house wasn't just a structure, it was a memory bank, a line in the sand, and I was done letting someone else hold the pen. The morning sun burned off the last of the mist, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Dad's map, the permits, the Polaroid. They sat on the dining table like a shield, proof that legacy mattered more than power. I stared at them over a cup of coffee, weighing what to do next. Danny slid in across from me, sleep still in her eyes. "Is that really Grandpa's handwriting?" she asked, tracing a finger over the faded script. "Every line. He wrote it all down because he knew people forget what's fair." My voice cracked, but I covered it with a cough. "I think today we remind them." A knock rattled the front door before I could lose my nerve. Paul stood there, hands in his jacket, a worried set to his jaw. "Heard Barbara's on the warpath. She's got half the board whipped up. You gonna show 'em what you found?" I nodded, holding up the permit like a playing card. "She can't argue with city signatures. If Tom wants to keep hiding, that's on him, but I'm done playing defense." Paul glanced behind him, lowering his voice. "Careful, Lena. She's already talking about liens. Don't put it past her to twist things." I thanked him, promising I'd let him know how it went. As he left, I watched Karen cross her yard, phone to her ear, eyes flicking back to my house. The grapevine was working overtime. Danny ducked into the hallway with her phone, snapping a photo of the Polaroid. "I want something to remind me, just in case," she grinned, but I heard the worry beneath it. "If it gets bad, we can always move, right?" I shook my head. "Not running. Not this time." By noon, I'd left messages for Tom. No answer. I wasn't surprised. I gathered the documents, tucked Dad's map into my pocket, and headed to the community center. The place was already buzzing. Barbara perched at the front, all power suit and pearls, her expression carved from marble. She spotted me. "Miss Avery, here to contest another bylaw?" "Here to clarify them, actually." I took a seat by the window, angled so I could watch the street and the old willow out front. Its branches swayed, steady, stubborn. Barbara opened the meeting with her usual ritual, reading the citations, sighing at non-compliance, thanking everyone for upholding community standards. Her voice was syrupy with authority, but her eyes kept darting toward my folder. Halfway through the agenda, I raised my hand. "About the fire pit. Here are city permits. Here's Tom Grady's signature from '97. Here's an inspection sheet, stamped compliant. If you want to find me, you'll have to explain to the city why their own paperwork isn't good enough." The board murmured. Karen from the far side shot me a tiny quick thumbs up. Barbara's jaw tightened. "That doesn't exempt you from HOA rules. We can still assess penalties." "Sure," I said, "but you'll have to explain why the HOA approved it too. Want me to read the minutes?" She fumbled her papers. Tom's pen scratched at the edge of the table, hands visibly shaking. I caught his gaze for half a heartbeat. Something like guilt or relief flickered in his eyes. The vote on my fine went forward. Tom hesitated, then abstained. The margin was razor thin, but Barbara's camp still won. Fine upheld. I didn't let them see me sweat. Instead, I leaned back, a slow smile tugging at my mouth. "I'll appeal. and I'll invite the city inspector to the next meeting. Hope you've got space on the agenda." Barbara's mask cracked, just for a second. Outside, Karen caught up with me at the steps. "You shook her. And Tom, he's scared. Don't blame him. He's got history with your dad, but Barbara's got her hooks in deep." I let her words sink in. Everyone's got something to lose, I guess, but I'm not losing this. That evening, I sat beneath the willow tree, the map folded in my hands. Danny curled beside me, head on my shoulder. In that quiet, surrounded by memories, I felt Dad's presence strongest. I promised him, out loud, just once, I wouldn't let them erase what he built. The tree's leaves shivered above us, scattering light across the old porch swing, across everything I refused to surrender. Have you ever stood up for something that mattered, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against you? Drop your story or just say where you're watching from, and stick around, because this isn't over. The real fight's just getting started. Evening drifted down, the willow's branches sweeping the porch in shadow. Danny and I lingered outside, her head still tucked against my shoulder, when my phone buzzed. A new text, number unknown. "Check your mailbox after dark." Dark. I stared at the screen, adrenaline crackling, heart kicking up. There was only one T who would risk sending that. I waited until the house lights dimmed, until Danny had wandered upstairs before slipping out. The air hummed with the usual suburban quiet. Crickets, a distant siren, nothing out of place. I padded down the drive in socks, toes numb in the cool grass. The mailbox creaked open. Inside was a plain envelope, no stamp, my name scrawled in shaky pen. Back in the kitchen, I tore it open with trembling hands. The contents stopped me cold. An old HOA memo from 2003. Subject line, variance approval. Fire pit, 44 Willow Lane. In black and white, it documented the board's vote, Tom Grady's signature alongside my father's. Scrawled in the margin, a note in Tom's handwriting. Barbara overruled the vote, filed her own complaint, keep a copy. My mind spun. Barbara's war on the fire pit had always been personal, not procedural. I ran a finger over Tom's note, the loops of each letter tight with worry, guilt and fear coiled together. He'd never really switched sides, just gone silent, buying time, keeping himself in Barbara's blind spot. Danny came down, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're not sleeping again." I smiled at her, holding up the memo. "We've got another piece of the puzzle. Tom was with us even when he couldn't say it out loud." She peered at the paper, brow furrowing. "Can we use this?" "We can," I said, a plan taking shape, "but first, we need to back it up, make copies, let the right people know what Barbara's been hiding." I texted Paul, told him to come by early, bring Karen if she could. Time to build a team, not just fend off attacks. The next morning, Paul showed up before sunrise, balancing a tray of coffees. Karen joined a little later, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes, lips pursed. I laid out the memo, the city permit, Dad's map, the Polaroid, our arsenal of truth. Karen took one look at the memo and hissed, "She's been pulling this kind of thing for years, just never with someone stubborn enough to fight back." She flicked through the pages, snapping photos with her phone. "People are scared of her. They're tired, Lena. You win this, you don't win it alone." Paul grinned. "If you want backup at the next meeting, you've got it. Let me know what to say." For the first time since this all started, I felt like I wasn't just standing my ground. I was moving forward. The odds weren't as lopsided as they seemed. The sun climbed higher, slanting through the kitchen, illuminating Dad's map where it lay on the table. I traced the route he'd drawn for me, a winding line from the back fence to the willow, a hidden message. Don't give up. Later, I sent copies of everything to Eli. Might need you in uniform, little brother, just in case she brings out the big guns. He texted back, "Got your 6, just say the word." Before bed, I slipped outside again. Tom stood at the edge of his driveway, head down, hands deep in his pockets. I crossed over, silent until I stood beside him. He didn't look up. "You get my note?" "I did," I said. "Thank you." He let out a shaky breath. "I can't take her on, Lena, but I won't stand in your way." "That's enough," I said softly. "You've already done more than you know." We stood there under the street lamp, two tired neighbors, a little less alone than before. The game had changed, and in the darkness I could almost hear Dad's voice. Some battles are fought in the open. Some are won by what's hidden. The next HOA board meeting was set for Wednesday, and the tension in the neighborhood was sharper than the scent of fresh mulch on Barbara's front lawn. I spent the morning in the kitchen with Paul and Karen, spreading out every piece of evidence: Dad's map, the city permit, Tom's memo, the Polaroid. Every page felt like a little act of defiance. Paul tapped his mug on the table. You know she's going to come at you sideways, not straight on. You sure you want to play hardball in public? I'm sure, I said, stuffing the documents into a red folder. But we're not just playing defense anymore. We're setting the agenda. Karen grinned. About time someone did. By midday, I called Eli. Bring your badge and your best I dare you face. We need backup. He just laughed. Trust me, I live for this. It was time to stop letting Barbara write the narrative. I drafted an email to Judge Ramirez attaching scans of the permit and the board memo with a request for a formal mediation. I copied the city inspector too, citing potential HOA overreach and selective enforcement. If I was going to make a stand, it would be out in the open, where everyone could see who was playing by the rules and who was rewriting them to suit themselves. Danny helped organize the copies and set up my phone to record audio. Insurance, she said, flashing a wry smile, in case someone tries to rewrite history on the fly. The meeting was crowded. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months filled the folding chairs, shifting with nervous energy. Karen sat by the window, ready to text updates to anyone who couldn't make it. Paul leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes on the board. Barbara opened with her usual routine, reading citations in her practiced, weary tone, making every bylaw violation sound like a crime against humanity. When she got to the ongoing fire pit issue, she paused, eyes scanning the crowd. Avery, do you have anything to say before we proceed with additional fines and liens? Her voice was syrup and steel. I stood, red folder in hand. Actually, I do. I have the city permit for the fire pit, signed by the inspector and Tom Grady. Here's the original HOA memo confirming variance approval in 2003, along with proof that you overruled a legal vote and filed a complaint in your own name. I've shared these with city officials and requested mediation. The crowd stirred. Paul shot me a nod. Karen's phone buzzed with responses. Tom looked pale, but finally met my eyes across the table. Barbara tried to regain control. You can't ambush the board like this. These issues should be handled privately. I shook my head. You've handled everything in the shadows long enough. The neighborhood deserves to know what's really happening. Behind her calm mask, Barbara was rattled. Her hands trembled as she shuffled her papers, looking for an escape. This isn't the time or the place. Judge Ramirez walked in, summoned earlier by my email. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Actually, it is, the judge said, her voice carrying through the hall. If the city's being used to enforce rules selectively or unfairly, that's a matter for public record. A low murmur swept the crowd. I held the folder tight, the memory of Dad's map and his stubborn handwriting burning in my mind. This wasn't just about a fire pit. It was about every neighbor who'd felt powerless or alone. For the first time, Barbara looked afraid. She glanced at Tom, who straightened his back and spoke, clear but quiet. The record's right, Judge. The vote happened. Lena's telling the truth. That was the crack we needed. I sat down, feeling Danny's hand squeeze mine under the table. We weren't finished, but the tide was turning, and for the first time since this all began, I could see what justice might look like. Not just for me, but for everyone Barbara had ever tried to silence. Judge Ramirez's arrival was the kind of moment you see once a decade in Willow Estates. The air had that strange hush, like a summer storm about to break. I could feel eyes shifting between me and Barbara, hungry for a crack in her armor, eager to see if I'd actually pulled the rug out from under her after all. Barbara tried to pivot, smoothing her skirt, her voice syrupy sweet. We're all just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, Judge. There's no need to escalate this. Judge Ramirez cut her off, raising a hand. I'm not here to mediate personalities. I'm here to see if any bylaws have been manipulated or city codes violated. If anyone feels they've been targeted or treated unfairly, now's the time to speak up. Paul leaned forward, clear and measured. Barbara's cited Lena 4 times for things the rest of us do every week. Fire pits, bins, even garden colors. But she never came after my flagpole or Karen's holiday lights. It's not about rules. It's about who she likes and who she doesn't. Karen added, we've all heard the threats. Most of us just pay and hope she'll move on. Barbara's veneer cracked, a tremor in her hands as she shuffled her paperwork. With all due respect, these accusations are hearsay. We're here to talk about Lena's fire pit. But Judge Ramirez wasn't fooled. Selective enforcement is a serious claim. I'll need to see all board meeting minutes, records of prior variances, and any documentation about disciplinary votes. Tom finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper, but steady enough to quiet the room. The board voted to let Lena's father keep the fire pit. Barbara went behind our backs. She's done it before, used her own complaints to override the rest of us. The silence was thick, nobody sure where to look. For a moment, Barbara's only defense was a series of tight, shallow breaths. She shot me a glare meant to wither, but I barely felt it. Eli shifted at the back of the room, his uniform lending weight to every glance. He gave me a quick nod, solidarity and a badge, and a reminder I had more than ghosts backing me up. The judge took it all in, no wasted words. I want all related files on my desk by tomorrow morning. Until then, all enforcement actions against Miss Avery are suspended. A ripple went through the crowd. Relief, surprise, a little bit of quiet vindication. People who'd never said a word to me before offered handshakes, nods, even a few whispered apologies. Barbara gathered her things in silence, hands shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone. Outside the hall, she tried to intercept Tom, but he brushed past her, not even a glance back. Karen caught up to me, her voice low. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for the rest of us. People are already talking about replacing the board. You've changed something. I shrugged, suddenly tired. It's not over. She'll fight dirty. People like her don't know how to let go. Paul grinned, clapping my shoulder. Let her try. You're not alone anymore. Walking home, the porch lights seemed a little brighter, the air a bit lighter. Danny greeted me at the door, bouncing on her toes. Did you win? Let's just say I scored the first goal. The game's still on. We sat on the porch swing, the willow's branches brushing the roof. I watched a pair of neighborhood kids ride bikes past my fence, laughing. No fear in their voices, no one watching from behind curtains. I realized then, win or lose, the fight had already started changing the place. I wasn't just fighting for my own yard. I was defending every inch of ground people like Barbara tried to claim for themselves. Inside, I laid Dad's map out on the table, tracing the familiar line to the fire pit. Danny watched me, silent for a long moment. We're making our own rules now, aren't we? I nodded. About time, don't you think? Have you ever had to call out someone in power, at work, in your building, maybe right on your street? Share your experience or just let me know where you're watching from. The stakes are only getting higher, and trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. The morning after the meeting, the neighborhood buzzed in a way I'd never felt. People waved from driveways, lingered a little longer at the mailbox, nodding in my direction. It wasn't hero worship, it was the quiet acknowledgement of someone who'd cracked a window open, letting in a breeze everyone was desperate for. Danny flopped onto the kitchen stool, still in pajamas, scrolling through a flood of messages. Mom, did you know there's a group chat called HOA Survivors? They're planning a block party at our place. Paul says we're all bringing s'mores supplies. I almost laughed. I suppose we should be honored. Has anyone told Barbara she's not invited? Danny grinned, swinging her feet. They said she can come if she brings a peace offering, like a resignation letter. The invitation on the group chat was real. Backyard fire pit night, Avery residence, Friday at sundown. I stared at it, the simple warmth of those words. The fight had become a cause. Even Karen, who'd always kept her head down, was organizing snacks and reaching out to neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in years. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the eye of the storm was passing, not the storm itself. I spent the afternoon sorting through more paperwork, making sure every document was scanned and backed up. At one point, Tom stopped by, hat in hand, glancing up and down the street. He hesitated on my steps. Got a minute? I nodded, waving him inside. He didn't sit. Barbara's not done. She's going to the city council, trying to get them to revisit the old fire code. She called me last night, said if I testified, she'd take care of my late dues, offered to sweep them away. My jaw clenched. And? He shook his head. I'm not for sale, Lena. I told her to stuff it. She's desperate. Thought you should know. It stung. Barbara was still clawing at the edges of power, but Tom's resolve steadied me. I handed him a fresh cup of coffee. grateful for the small alliance that had taken root between us. That evening, the backyard was alive. Lanterns dangled from the willow tree, casting looping shadows over folding chairs and kids darting around with sparklers. Paul flipped hot dogs on a battered grill. Karen handed out lemonade like it was liquid gold. People talked about more than HOA meetings. They joked, shared recipes, swapped dog-sitting favors. Even the city inspector showed up at my invitation, not Barbara's. He shook my hand, glanced at the fire pit, then at the stack of paperwork I'd prepped. "Looks compliant to me. You did your homework." Daniel took a Polaroid of the whole group around the fire, laughter frozen in that little square frame. She pressed it into my hand. "For the next map," she said, grinning. Night wore on, but no police cars appeared, no fines taped to the door. The only authority present was Eli, off duty, wearing a faded ball cap, toasting marshmallows with the kids. Barbara watched from her window across the street, her silhouette stiff and small behind lace curtains. For the first time, I pitied her, not enough to forgive, but enough to recognize her fear. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. The fire pit glowed late into the night. Stories flowed. About Dad, about lost dogs and found friends, about the stubborn hope it takes to plant yourself and refuse to be moved. I saw the neighborhood differently, not just as a battleground, but as a tapestry woven together by resistance, humor, and a shared hunger for real community. After everyone left, Danny and I sat on the old porch swing beneath the willow, the Polaroid clutched between us. The wind moved through the leaves, the porch creaked, and for a moment, everything was just right. The summons arrived 2 days later, a formal community hearing at the rec center, city council invited, the HOA board required to attend. Not just another meeting, this was public, with every neighbor able to stand and be heard. I felt it in my bones. The storm Barbara had tried to hide was about to break wide open. The hall buzzed with tension. Paul stood near the entrance, arms folded, offering nods to everyone who came through. Karen checked people in, clipboard trembling, but her voice steady, catching eyes and holding them. Tom hovered at the edge of the crowd, pale but present, his way of saying he wasn't running anymore. Danny stuck close, nerves masked with her best sarcastic smile. Barbara sat at the head table, flanked by board members who suddenly looked less like allies and more like nervous extras. The city council reps and Judge Ramirez took seats at the front. The room was packed, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with anticipation and a whisper of hope. Judge Ramirez's gavel rang out. "We're here to hear the community's concerns about selective enforcement, improper board actions, and the broader impact on Willow Estates." Her gaze was clear and cutting, the kind that lets no one squirm free. "Ms. Avery, you have the floor." I stood, hands wrapped around the red folder that had become my shield. I didn't bother with speeches. I read the memo, the vote, the permit. I told the story as plainly as I could, how Barbara's threats had driven out good families, how she twisted rules to punish whoever challenged her. I handed the Polaroid to the judge. "This is the only time all three of them agreed on anything," I said, voice tight with feeling. The room listened. For once, nobody interrupted. Karen spoke next. She recounted how Barbara had warned her against fraternizing with the wrong neighbors. Paul added how his complaints about potholes had been buried, while fire pit emergencies always made top priority. Tom, trembling but determined, stepped forward. He admitted what he'd hidden for years. I signed off on the variance. I was there for the vote. Barbara doctored the minutes and told the rest of us to keep quiet or lose our seat. Barbara's face drained of color, lips pressed into a line. She tried to interrupt, but Judge Ramirez stopped her with a glance. The city inspector stood, confirming the pit was legal. "There's no safety violation here, just a problem with leadership." A hush fell as Judge Ramirez reviewed the evidence. When she spoke, the authority in her voice felt like a wave washing the room clean. "Selective enforcement erodes trust. The board's actions, as shown here, are improper and subject to city oversight. I'm recommending the immediate suspension of the current HOA president and a review of all recent fines." A ripple of relief and a few incredulous laughs ran through the crowd. Neighbors who'd been silent for years found their voices, offering support, even apologies. A young couple stood up and admitted they'd almost sold their house to get away from the drama. Now, they wanted to stay. Barbara sat stone still, her power broken, not by violence or rage, but by paper, truth, and persistence. She glanced my way, but whatever accusation she meant to throw died before it reached her lips. Afterward, Eli clapped me on the back, grinning. Never seen a whole room turn like that. Daniel hugged me, whispering, "He'd be proud, Mom. Grandpa, I mean." I blinked hard, letting the emotion hit. For the first time in years, the place didn't feel haunted by battles. It felt like home again, a place claimed by honesty, not fear. The judge closed the meeting. The board would be reformed, bylaws rewritten in the open, neighbors given a voice. I didn't just win for myself. I'd helped the neighborhood remember what community could be. Walking home beneath the willow, Danny linked her arm through mine. "Ready to light the fire pit?" "Let's do it," I said, smiling into the dusk. The week after the hearing felt like stepping into a new world, one I'd almost stopped believing could exist. Neighbors waved instead of whispering, Karen knocked with a pie and news about the upcoming board elections. Paul left a fresh bag of charcoal on the back step. I heard laughter from houses that had been silent for years. Even Tom, moving with more ease than I'd ever seen, strolled by just to chat about nothing at all. Danny spent her afternoons repainting the old porch swing, bright blue like it was when I was a kid. "We're starting over," she said, flecks of paint dotting her cheek. "This time, it's ours." I watched her work, my chest full of pride and something softer. Relief, maybe, or hope, or the realization that this place was finally safe to hand down. Friday night arrived. The block party Karen had dreamed up was in full swing by sunset. String lights hung from the willow tree, weaving golden patterns across faces old and new. Kids darted around the yard, their laughter high and unafraid. Paul manned the grill, flipping burgers with the confidence of someone who'd survived the worst kind of politics. The air smelled like summer and freedom. I stood by the fire pit, hands deep in my pockets, watching the flames twist and leap. Tom joined me, mug in hand. "You did it, Lena. Your dad would have been proud." I shook my head. "We did it. I just lit the match." He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. "Maybe, but you kept it burnin'." Neighbors gathered, swapping stories that had nothing to do with fines or threats, just good gossip, shared history, promises for better days. The city council rep dropped by to thank me for restoring civic sanity. Eli wandered through the crowd in a Hawaiian shirt, blending in perfectly until someone challenged him to a game of horseshoes. When the fire died down, Danny pulled me to the porch swing, the two of us curling up together under an old blanket. She held the Polaroid from the first backyard party after the hearing. Everyone's faces bright, the fire's glow painting them in memory. She tucked it into the back of Dad's map, then handed it to me. "For safekeeping. You'll need it the next time someone tries to tell us what home means." I looked around, at the faces, the laughter, the willow tree dancing in the breeze, the porch swing newly painted. This was what Dad meant when he said a house wasn't a home until you filled it with your own stubborn, honest joy. Before midnight, people started drifting away. Karen hugged me at the door. Paul promised to fix my fence next week. Tom shook my hand. Steady now, no more trembling. I lingered on the porch as quiet settled back over Willow Lane. The embers in the fire pit glowed steady and sure, a promise that this place would endure, that dignity and justice would always find their way back. I turned to Danny, her head on my shoulder, her breath even and calm. "You know, I used to think legacy was something you inherited. Turns out, it's something you defend, every day, against people who think they can take it." She smiled, her voice sleepy. "Looks like you won." "Maybe," I said, watching the last sparks wink out. "But the best part is, I'm finally home. We all have something worth fighting for." Tell me, what's your story? Drop it in the comments or just share where you're watching from. No one should have to stand alone.